Women and girls are leaders, change makers, caretakers, and peacekeepers. But while they have an empowered role in our societies, to this day, women and girls are still forced to fight for their rights. How much progress have we achieved, and how much work remains? How can you carry on the fight for equal rights? Women's struggle for equal rights is centuries old. But 1848 marked a watershed moment for women's rights with the Seneca Falls Convention, where women activists publicly petitioned for their civil, social, political, and religious rights. In 1893, New Zealand sent a message to other activists across the world that equal voting rights were achievable through advocacy. Entering the 20th century, women around the world are mobilizing in ever greater numbers to campaign for gender equality. Just as women's role in the labor force is rapidly evolving by opening up options beyond caretaking roles. In 1945, the United Nations is formed in response to the destructive toll of 2 world wars, and Eleanor Roosevelt oversees the drafting of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. For all the world to hear, she and other advocates underline the place of women's rights within. This sets a foundation for women's rights norms and standards at the international level. In the subsequent decades, just as women are taking historic leadership positions in government, women activists at the grassroots level dovetail with the worldwide momentum by becoming powerful symbols of feminist resistance and social change. This momentum reaches a climax in 1995 when the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action presents a visionary global agenda for women and girls' rights. But in spite of all the progress, as we enter the 21st century, patriarchal stigmas persist and exemplary leaders arise to resist them. With the rise of the digital age, social media emerges as a crucial tool to galvanize populations in the fight against injustice. A single woman's voice is now louder than ever. Grassroots activists trigger social movements online and offline, from cities to villages, inspiring future generations of women and girl leaders. After relentless campaigning, these movements generate changes in policy that signal a true shift in international attitudes and practice towards equal rights. Where are we now? A quarter century after the Beijing Declaration, women and men must mobilize together to overcome the remaining obstacles to gender equality. They must fight for an end to gender-based violence, for access to healthcare, for equal pay, and for equal participation in political life. The ink isn't dry. Be a part of Generation Equality, and let us continue to write history together.
Dear all, it is with great pleasure that I welcome you all today, an emblematic day for women all around the world. We opened today's event with this wonderful video created by UN Women, which is the United Nations entity dedicated to gender equality and the empowerment of women. The Mariana Vardis Vardinogiannis Foundation supports this global champion and its efforts for a better and more equal world. Dear friends, celebrating the International Women's Day is not just an obligation to the pioneers of the women movement for equal rights, but a reminding that we have still more fight for. On the occasion of the International Women's Day, the Mariana Vardis Vardinogiannis Foundation undertakes the initiative for an in-depth discussion on the major challenges women are facing in the era of the pandemic. At the same time, today's discussion is extremely topical and has a special significance since we are in the heart of the Greek Me Too movement, a very important social revolution that has led to the breaking of fear and silence as women now speak freely and openly about all kinds of abuse. I'm honored to coordinate the first roundtable, and we are ready to start with the introduction by Mrs. Mariana Vardinogiannis, Goodwill Ambassador of UNESCO, United Nations Nelson Mandela Award 2020.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I feel especially honored and privileged to welcome you to our virtual roundtable on the occasion of International Women's Day, a day on which we pay tribute to women's struggles for their right not only to work but also to a society with equal opportunities for all genders to a better world. The extraordinary acts of women inspire all of us to stand together as a united force to advance gender equality around the globe. This year's International Women's Day is different because life has changed. We face a troubling world. Our societies are in grief. The pandemic has deepened global fault lines, has underlined inequalities between rich and poor countries, and has given rise to a major economic and social crisis. We have come to realize with great concern that in the era of the COVID-19 pandemic, everything that we have achieved for gender equality is now under threat because of this harsh and uncertain reality. Women are facing poverty, unemployment, salary cuts, and very often they are faced with the dilemma of abandoning their career due to new and pressing demands. The percentage of women's unemployment is rising so fast that the Vice President of the United States, Mrs. Kamala Harris, recently talked about a mass exodus of women from the workforce. At the same time, there is a pseudo pandemic that is growing according to the United Nations as there is an alarming increase in domestic violence against women and girls during lockdowns. There is a serious impact on the mental health of women who experience such immense pressure and fear, and all recent studies have shown that twice as many women as men are affected. Girls are more likely to drop out of school than boys in many regions, and this is one of the major issues of that UNESCO highlights when urging the international community to invest in education and to prevent a generation from being lost. On the other hand, there are many women around us that thrive. This is the reason why the United Nations chose women in leadership. Achieving an equal future in a COVID-19 world as this year's theme for International Women's Day, underlying the important role of women in shaping the day after. Is there a feminine perspective? Are solidarity, compassion, sharing and caring qualities found more often in women rather than men? Being a goodwill ambassador of UNESCO and a member of the UN family for more than 20 years, I have no doubt that in the hardest times, these paths are the safest way to bring about fairer and better solutions. During the pandemic, we watched women who are world leaders being recognized for the effectiveness of their country's response to COVID-19, and all agree that women leaders in international and European institutions daily strive to protect our societies. Especially in the fight against COVID-19, they stand at the front line. Almost 70% of the workers in healthcare, doctors, nurses, or caregivers are women, and women scientists who join forces to produce vaccines and cure for COVID-19 offer a great service to humanity. More than ever, in these difficult times, we believe that the women who keep families connected are also able to keep our work united. No matter where they came from, they speak a common language and share a common vision, the vision of a world of peace, justice, equality, diversity, and non-violence. A world for their children to live in. Today, we are joined by charismatic women who have strived for change and improvement, giving us courage and hope and inspiration. I am deeply touched to welcome them as our special guests who will share their analysis, knowledge, experience, and views with us. It is a great honor to have Her Excellency, the President of the Hellenic Republic, Mrs. Katerina Skeleropoulou, with us today. Known for her personal morals, ethics, and dedication to human rights, she is a true inspiration for all women in Greece and the whole world. I would like to thank her warmly for her valuable support. The First Lady of the Republic of Cyprus, Mrs. Andrea Anastasiadis, has devoted her life to helping those in need, setting an example not only for her beloved country, but for the whole world. Mrs. Mareva Grabowski-Mitsotakis, entrepreneur, is a champion and advocate of human rights, women's empowerment and culture, and wife of the Prime Minister of the Hellenic Republic, Kyriakos Mitsotakis. Mrs. Kennedy is a tireless activist and defender of human rights, with whom our foundation has joined forces to promote human rights education in Greek schools through the Speak Truth to Power program. Professor Fotini Pazarji, who has recently been elected as chairperson of the United Nations Human Rights Committee, is honoring us as keynote speaker. I would like to congratulate her on this important mission that reflects her enduring efforts for justice and equality, and to wish her the best of success. The speakers of our first panel have carried out significant work that we really admire in the vital fields of international and European organizations and ministries. The European Commissioner for Health, Mrs. Stella Kyriakidis, the Assistant Director General of the Sector for Social and Human Sciences of UNESCO, Mrs. Gabriela Ramos, the State Secretary of the Ministry of Economic Affairs of the Netherlands, Mrs. Mona Kaiser, the Permanent Representative of Greece to the United Nations, Ambassador Maria Theophili, Dr. Elena Doom, who is the first recipient of the United Nations Nelson Mandela Prize in 2015, and a member of the European Parliament, Mrs. Maria Spiraki. The speakers of our second panel are greatly accomplished Greek women who have contributed to politics, business, and solidarity. Mrs. Domna Michailidou, Deputy Minister of Labour and Social Affairs. Mrs. Maria Sirangela, Deputy Minister of Labour and Social Affairs, responsible for demography and family. Mrs. Milady Stubu, Chair of the Women in Business Committee of the American Hellenic Chamber of Commerce. Mrs. Anastasia Kotanidou, Professor of Pulmonology and Intensive Care. Mrs. Mariana Lemos, Vice President of Elpida Association of Friends of Children with Cancer. And Fotini Tsalikoglou, Emeritus Professor of Psychology. And of course, our moderators, Mrs. Mara Zacharea and Mrs. Andriana Paraskevopoulou, who are great examples of professionalism in journalism. From the bottom of my heart, I would like to thank all our speakers and moderators for your valuable contribution to our efforts. I would also like to thank our viewers who give us strength to go on. COVID-19 is not only a challenge for global health systems, but also a test for our human spirit. Let us make this crisis an opportunity for a better future and more resilient societies based on respect of human rights, equal opportunities for all, international cooperation, and global solidarity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Vardinogiannis, for your inspiring speech and for the effort you have been giving for long, being always in the frontier of where people in need are. It is time now to listen to the videotaped message of Her Excellency, the President of the Greek Republic, Ms. Katerina Sakelaropoulou.
Χαίρομαι που βρίσκομαι μαζί σας σε μια εκδήλωση για τις γυναίκες σε αυτή την ιδιαίτερη εποχή της πανδημίας. Είναι διαπιστωμένη και κοινή πλέον παραδοχή ότι από τα τόσα προβλήματα που συσσόρευσε η πανδημία, τα περισσότερα τα επομίστηκαν οι γυναίκες. Διχάστηκαν ανάμεσα στην εργασία, όσες είχαν, και τις αυξημένες οικογενειακές υποχρεώσεις. Με τα παιδιά στο σπίτι όταν τα σχολεία ήταν κλειστά. Τους ηλικιωμένους συγγενείς να χρειάζονται αυξημένη συνδρομή και βοήθεια χωρίς να είναι δυνατόν πάντοτε να τους παρασχεθεί. Τους συντρόφους να αγωνιούν για το μέλλον και να γίνονται δύστιμοι και κάποιες φορές βίαιοι. Εργάστηκαν σε συνθήκες αυξημένου κινδύνου. Ιδίως οι επαγγελματίες πρώτης γραμμής, γιατροί και νοσηλεύτριες, υπάλληλοι στα σούπερ μάρκετ, καθαρίστριες, γυροκόμοι, οικιακές βοηθοί, υπό επισφαλείς συνθήκες, κατά κανόνα με χαμηλότερες αμοιβές από τους άνδρες και με το φάσμα της ανεργίας να πλανιέται απειλητικό, πάντα παρόν. Άλλες δεν είχαν καν δουλειά. Μητέρες μονογονεϊκών οικογενειών που μεγαλώνουν μόνες τα παιδιά τους. Γυναίκες ηλικιωμένες, ευπαθείς, με πενιχρά εισοδήματα. Πρόσφυγες και μετανάστριες που ζουν μέσα στο φόβο και την ανέχεια. Συχνά θύματα σωματεμπορίας, σεξουαλικής εκμετάλλευσης, καταναγκαστικής εργασίας, πολλαπλής κακοποίησης. Σε συνθήκες κρίσης, όπως αυτή που βιώνουμε σήμερα, οι έμφυλες ανισότητες αναπαράγονται και βαθαίνουν. Συμπιέζονται ασφικτικά οι επιλογές ζωής για τα κορίτσια και τις γυναίκες. Και δυστυχώς γίνεται πιο αισθητό το χάσμα ανάμεσα στα φύλλα, η μοναξιά, ακόμη και μέσα στη σχέση. Η ενδοοικογενειακή βία οξύνθηκε τρομερά την περίοδο της πανδημίας. Η κοινωνική ένταση και η αλλαγή επιταχύρω της καθημερινότητάς μας, η οικονομική ανασφάλεια, η αίσθηση της ανεπάρκειας και της αδυναμίας έφεραν συγκρούσεις μέσα στα σπίτια, λεκτική βία, ψυχική και σωματική κακοποίηση. Έφεραν πολλές γυναίκες σε μια θέση εγκλωβισμένου θύματος, χωρίς δυνατότητα διαφυγής. Και δεν υπάρχει χειρότερη συνθήκη από το να μετατραπεί ο ιδιωτικός χώρος σε μια ιδιότυπη φυλακή, όπου είσαι αναγκασμένη να συμβιώνεις με τον κακοποιητή σου. Δεν ξέρω τι τραύματα θα αφήσει πίσω της η πανδημία στις ψυχές των γυναικών. Οι ειδικοί μιλούν για προβλήματα ύπνου, άγχος, κατάθλιψη και ακόμη σοβαρότερες ψυχικές διαταραχές. Και δεν χρειάζεται καν να μιλήσουν οι ειδικοί. Βλέπουμε τα προβλήματα μπροστά μας. Κάποια έχουν πλήξει και εμάς τις ίδιες. Πιστεύω ωστόσο ότι οι γυναίκες είναι δυνατές και θα διεκδικήσουν ξανά τη ζωή τους με το σφρίγος και την αγωνιστική διάθεση που ανέκαθεν τις χαρακτήριζε. Το ελληνικό Me Too, που ξεκίνησε διστακτικά, αλλά ήδη αρχίζει να έχει σοβαρή αντανάκλαση στην κοινωνία, ελπίζω να βαθύνει σε περιεχόμενο, να αγωνιμοποιηθεί και να παραγάγει καρπούς. Ο ρόλος της πολιτείας σε αυτή την κρίσιμη συγκυρία είναι να δημιουργήσει τις προϋποθέσεις σε θεσμικό επίπεδο, ώστε οι έμφυλες διακρίσεις και τα στερεότυπα στα πεδία της εργασίας, του κοινωνικού αποκλεισμού, των κέντρων λήψης αποφάσεων, της οικογένειας, με άλλα λόγια σε κάθε πτυχή της δημόσιας και ιδιωτικής ζωής, σταδιακά να εκλείψουν. Από τη θέση που κατέχω, θα ενισχύσω με όλες μου τις δυνάμεις μια τέτοια προσπάθεια. Εύχομαι καλή επιτυχία στην εκδήλωσή σας.
A lot of thanks to the President of the Republic, who has the record being the first woman in the Greek presidency, an honor that was given to her by a vast majority of the members of the Greek Parliament. And now I have the honor to present an equally very important figure, a global active personality in the women's rights effort, Mrs. Andri Anastasiadis, First Lady of the Republic of Cyprus, who sent us the following message.
Honorable guests, dear friends, every country, every family, every person across the world has felt the devastating impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. As we celebrate this year's International Women's Day, we also pay tribute to all the women who have been at the forefront of our battle against this disease. From frontline workers, doctors, nurses, and leading scientists in vaccine research to government leaders, as well as their major role at home and workplaces, women's massive contribution has been extremely crucial in efforts to limit the spread of the virus and overcome this crisis. However, while the pandemic continues unabated to affect our lives, it is obvious that this unprecedented crisis is having a regressive effect on gender equality. As evidence shows, the impact of COVID-19 has not been spread equally, with women being affected by its dire social and economic consequences more than men, highlighting a broader landscape of inequalities against women, vastly affecting the progress achieved in previous years. Lockdown measures and long periods of social isolation have led to increased domestic and sexual violence and abuse against women. Regretfully, as history has shown, time and again similar patterns emerged in previous public health crises as well. Even before the pandemic unfolded, women have always continued to shoulder the majority of family and household responsibilities. Since the outbreak, this gap has increased, especially when schools closed, which resulted in women unemployment rates rising unfairly compared to those of men at a time of great economic instability. In the long road out of this crisis, there are lessons to be learned. Therefore, as we plan ahead for a more effective response to future health emergencies, we should also take into account the uneven impact of women. Fighting for gender equality is a never-ending process. The faster of governments and policy makers step up and map out a plan of action to counter gender inequality, even in the midst of a pandemic. The benefits will be significant for every country as women play a decisive role on growing and prosperous economies. They also have a key role to play in post-pandemic recovery efforts, and we have to take those fundamental steps to ensure that women are indeed empowered to contribute to the recovery we all strive for. In this respect, I look forward to today's deliberations and in-depth analysis and data from the distinguished speakers participating for a wide range of sectors, most of them having been severely affected by the pandemic. My dearest Marianna, thank you for convening this timely and important discussion, another great initiative from the Marianna Vardinogiannis Foundation. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to exchange views on the significant challenges women are facing all over the world since the COVID-19 outbreak. Thank you all for your attention.
Many thanks to Mrs. Anastasiadis for her analysis and especially for her participation in this virtual roundtable. It is now with great pleasure that I introduce the next speaker, a woman who is a real fighter. She is a prominent figure at the business world, where she was accepted for her effort in introducing a big idea that led to a much bigger success. I'm talking about Mrs. Mareva Grambowski-Mitsotakis, a mother of 3 children and wife of Her Excellency the Prime Minister of the Hellenic Republic. Let's hear her message.
Dear Mrs. Vardinogiannis, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to be part of this event today, hosted by the Mariana Vardinogiannis Foundation in celebration of International Women's Day. Despite the challenges the pandemic has brought all over the world, challenges that have forced us all to adjust our priorities and rethink the very nature of the relationships that matter to us, we have ample reason to celebrate the achievements and contribution of women. From the front lines of scientific research for vaccines and a cure to hospital intensive care units, from kindergartens and schools to elderly care facilities, from the boardroom of international conglomerates to the stockrooms of local supermarkets, women have taken on such a crucial role in helping us all weather this crisis. We are so very thankful to and proud of each and every one of them. This year, we celebrate women under unique circumstances, which only highlight their extraordinary contribution to family, work, and society. Women have always been subject to abuse and violence. These phenomena have unfortunately been heightened during the pandemic. Physical, sexual, and psychological abuse have been on the rise, increasing fear and in turn the silence of women. Over the past few months, however, at least in our country, there has been a glimmer of hope that we can indeed break this cycle of fear and silence. Sofia Bekatorou's courageous decision to speak out has allowed countless other women to share their experiences, to talk about what happened to them, and to help us all send a clear and unequivocal message against every form of abuse and violence against women. It has no place in our lives. It has no place in our society. With every woman who speaks out, we build a wall of defense against abuse and violence in support of every young girl and woman that dreams of a better future. The SOS telephone line 15900 offers 24-hour support for women in need. 42 centers around the country provide social, psychological, and legal support, and 20 shelters offer safe refuge to women and their children. But much more work needs to be done. In the decade ahead of us, technology and climate change will dramatically alter the way we work and function within the marketplace and society. Women must not lag behind. This is why access to knowledge and education should be a collective priority for all of us. We need to fully utilize the tools we have at our disposal to this end. We need to be outward thinking, to share our experiences and knowledge. Things have changed lately. Women today feel that they are finally heard. Their voices resonate. Above all, we must be united in all these efforts. Our struggle for equality in practice, not word, is constant. Every day we must strive harder. We owe it to the previous generation of women who fought for us. It is our duty. We owe it to ourselves. And above all, we owe it to the future generations of women that follow. Thank you very much.
We thank Ms. Mareva Mitsotakis for her inspiring speech and for all the thoughts she had the kindness to share with us. Last but not least, an internationally well-known and recognized woman, not only for the great history of her family, but overall for her thoughtful personality. Ms. Kerry Kennedy, President of the Robert Kennedy Human Rights, sent us the following message.
Happy International Women's Day. I want you to know how much it means to me to be here with all of you today, especially my dear friend Mariana Vardinogiannis. Over 35 years, I have seen Mariana speak her truth to power on behalf of children suffering from cancer, on behalf of victims of war seeking refuge, and on behalf of students across Greece seeking to learn how to assert their basic rights. Mariana is a true patriot. When others with her resources fled Greece during the financial crisis, Mariana stayed in Athens and worked night and day to help the ship of state find calmer seas and a following wind. She is a patron of the ancient past who has protected the Acropolis and demanded the return of the so-called Elgin marbles. She is an extraordinary advocate for women. Witness today's events. Mariana is my inspiration, my mentor, and my friend. Thank you, Mariana. It is incredible to think that a year ago we were in the early stages of a worldwide lockdown as COVID-19 was sweeping across the globe with a speed and a savageness that few would have predicted. We didn't know then how many lives would be lost, how fundamentally our daily lives and perspectives would change, or what the many, many ripple effects of the pandemic would be. But we know today that what the United Nations calls a shadow pandemic has emerged where all types of violence against women, particularly domestic violence, have increased due to COVID. Across the globe, COVID has taken a devastating impact on the lives of women. Women are most likely to be exposed to COVID because we are the caretakers, the healthcare workers, and the teachers. A survey of 104 countries found that 80% of nurses are women. Once sick, women are less likely to have the financial resources to care for themselves. Adding to the gender pay gap, women have been forced to leave work in order to care for loved ones, as well as to care for the kids who are no longer in school, further eroding their economic stability and their power at home. As a result of COVID, 1.54 billion children are no longer in school, the vast majority of whom are cared for by women. Pre-COVID, women were doing 3/4 of the 16 billion hours of unpaid domestic work worldwide each year. That number has skyrocketed in the last 12 months. The combination of economic pressure, illness, childcare needs, and social isolation, along with the prevalence of misogynist societies, have resulted in women being badgered and brutalized and beaten and raped in unprecedented numbers across the globe. A report by Save the Children predicts that the economic impacts of the pandemic pushed an estimated 500,000 girls into child marriage in 2020 alone. Emerging data shows a 5-fold increase in domestic violence helplines, so much so that code words were developed to keep survivors to give survivors discreet routes of support in pharmacies in Britain and France. And despite sheltering in place, sexual harassment and other forms of violence against women continues to occur on streets, in public spaces, and online. What's more, survivors have limited information, awareness, and access to support services. With the partner perpetrator in the room next door, survivors are having an increasingly difficult time calling for help. If the recent Me Too movement has shown us anything, it's that women must fight for women with transformative empathy, working to expand and strengthen our community of survivors. I am so proud that Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights, a women-founded, women-led human rights organization, has made eradicating violence against women around the world one of its major goals in 2021. Here's a small snapshot of what we're tracking. In Honduras, 29 women have already been killed this year. That includes the case of Kayla Martinez, a 26-year-old nursing student who was beaten and asphyxiated by police officers, according to agent testimony. The head of the police station in question was allegedly present at the time. In 2015, RFK Human Rights won a landmark case before the Inter-American Court for Human Rights that held Guatemala accountable for the gender-based murder of 19-year-old student Claudina Isabella. But more needs to be done, especially because we are in the face of systemic problems, not isolated cases. Femicides are more prevalent in countries with greater gender inequality and less female representation in government, showing that they are symptomatic of more systemic problems. Strength comes in numbers. We together as women must rise up, supporting one another and demanding an end once and for all to being treated as lesser, inferior sex. Activism can happen at any age, in any place. Since she was in college, my youngest daughter, Michaela, has been an outspoken advocate for combating sexual violence and assault, encouraging bystanders to speak up, empowering victims, and creating awareness on campus about how to create and maintain healthy sexual relationships. As the saying goes, empowered women empower women. That's what today's conference is all about. I'm honored to join you, and again, my thanks to Mariana Vardinoyanis and to everyone who worked so hard to bring all of us together today. Here's to strong women. May we know them, may we be them, may we raise them. Thank you.
Many thanks to Mrs. Kennedy. Dear participants, this virtual roundtable of the Mariana Vardis-Vardinogiannis Foundation about women in the era of the pandemic came to an end. I would like to thank you all for being present. Thank you very much, Mrs. Mariana Vardinogiannis. We will now connect with the European Parliament and the Member of the Parliament, Ms. Maria Spiraki, who will make the introduction and moderate the first panel about the challenges for women of the world, facts and figures. Maria, it's your turn now.
A warm welcome from the European Parliament. Good afternoon to all of you, and congratulations to Mariana Vardinogiannis Foundation for this very important and very special initiative. The COVID-19 pandemic has affected the lives of hundreds of thousands of people around the world. At the beginning of March 2020, most EU governments imposed drastic measures to contain the growing epidemic. While these measures have largely stemmed from the spread of the virus, they have also had a huge impact on labour market participation. Specifically, during the pandemic, employment in the EU dropped significantly in the retail, tourism and hospitality sectors, where the women make up more than 60% of the workforce. Female unemployment in the bloc now stands at 8.1, whereas it stands at 7.2 for men. Economic insecurity is not just jobs and income lost today. It has a snowball effect on the lives of women and girls for the years to come. Impacts on education and employment have long-lasting consequences that, if not addressed, will reserve hard-won gains in gender equality. Quarantine measures keep people at home, close schools and daycare facilities. The burden of unpaid care and domestic work has exploded. Both women and men are spending more time on domestic work. Unfortunately, the distribution of the extra work within the couple appears to be highly unbalanced. The extra work is a burden mainly borne by women. Perhaps the most concerning is the rate at which women have been dropping out of the labour force altogether. Several advanced have seen the gap widen between active men and women in the labour force. One survey here in Europe found that 4% of women who lost their jobs during the pandemic stopped looking for work, compared with just 1% of men. Previous crises have shown us that once someone steps out of the job market, it can take years before he finally or she finally gets back in. But even before COVID-19, women did 3 times more unpaid care work than men worldwide. Specifically, women spent about 4.1 hours per day performing unpaid work, while men spent just 1.7 hours. After the pandemic, both men and women report an increase in unpaid work, but women continue to shoulder the bulk of that work, according to the recent OECD report. Moreover, a study from the Hellenic American Chamber of Commerce on the effects of COVID-19 on daily life and work reported that almost 1 in 2 women was more involved with the house during pandemic and lockdown, and the same correspondent percentage for men is just 1 in 5 men. From the other side, COVID pandemic was a success story for women leadership. And I would like to refer to the European Commission's President, Ursula von der Leyen. She's negotiated the diversified portfolio of vaccines for EU citizens at fair prices on behalf of EU countries. Even though it has received a lot of criticism on the management of the crisis, it remains indisputable that the alternative scenario, everyone for oneself, would be unrealistic, or for me, it will be a disaster. Now we have a very positive and realistic provision. By summer 2021, member states should have vaccinated a minimum of 70% of the entire adult population. Moreover, on February 71, moreover, on February 17, the Commission presented the HERA incubator. It is the new European biodefense preparedness plan against COVID-19 variants. The incubator will bring together science, industry and public authorities, and will pool all available resources to prepare Europe for this challenge. And the success story with women leadership does not end here. President von der Leyen took the first step and invited US President Joe Biden to Rome, to the World Health Summit, with the perspective to develop a preparedness and response plan for future health shocks. Another dominant figure during the corona pandemic is Christine Lagarde, President of the European Central Bank. Only in 2020, the European Central Bank formulated a response to the COVID-19 crisis, which included 1,850 billion as part of the pandemic emergency PERFAS program to lower borrowing costs and increase lending to the euro area. Last but not least, an important leading figure for vaccination and also for cancer prevention is now with us. Is Commissioner Stella Kyriakidis, Commissioner for Health and Food Safety. Commissioner Kyriakidis is leading on our work on Europe's Beating Cancer Plan, which also the scope of BECA committee in the European Parliament, in which I have the honor to participate as a full member. Commissioner Kyriakidis' scope in this regard is to help improve cancer prevention and care, and she is also in charge of developing a new pharmaceutical strategy to ensure that Europe has enough affordable medicines to meet all needs. Europe Beating Cancer Plan gave us the inspiration to work together with Mrs. Mariana Vardinogiannis for establishing a pediatric cancer registry platform to evaluate burden and help design control plans in Greece. Now, this platform has been announced by Prime Minister Mitsotakis, and it is a significant step forward to tackle pediatric cancer. And by saying that, I would like just to introduce our panel by starting with Commissioner Stella Kyriakidis, following Mrs. Mona Keizer, State Secretary, Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Policy from the Netherlands, Mrs. Maria Theophili, Ambassador Maria Theophili, Permanent Representative of Greece to the United Nations. She is heading the Permanent Representative of Greece to the United Nations. And also Mrs. Elena Doon. Mrs. Elena Doon was the first recipient of the inaugural United Nations Nelson Mandela Award for 2015. I would like to give the floor to Commissioner Kyriakidis. Dear Stella, we are honored and we have the pleasure to have you with us. You have the floor.
Good afternoon and good evening, everyone. Mrs. Vardinogianni, distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen, Maria. It's truly a privilege to be taking part in today's event on the occasion of International Women's Day. Once again, this is a day of reflection, a day when we reflect on our journey towards addressing gender inequality, increasing the visibility of women and girls, and paying tribute to their daily struggles while celebrating their achievements. The past year has been dominated by COVID-19 and has been like no other in recent memory. This unprecedented health crisis has been a harsh wake-up call for us all. It has highlighted the weak points in our health systems and the need to make them more resilient for the benefit of all citizens. On the occasion of this day, I would like to start today's brief intervention by paying tribute and recognizing the incredible contribution of women to the COVID-19 response. Globally, 2/3 of the health and social care workforce are women. Personal care workers, cleaners and helpers, education workers, and health professionals. Women health professionals and frontline workers have worked tirelessly and made extraordinary physical, mental, and personal sacrifices over the past year. And they continue to do so. They are among the unsung heroes of this pandemic. Being at the front line of the pandemic response places these women at a high risk of increased physical and psychological pressures, in addition to higher risks of infection. This also happens with occupations that are often undervalued and poorly paid, despite being essential in the pandemic response, such as those working in elderly care and disability support workers. At the same time, in some countries, we are seeing the pandemic pushing working mothers out of the labor force. Women and girls suffering increased levels of domestic abuse, physical and sexual, in the lockdowns, unable to even make a call to a helpline. In each of these examples, we must never forget the impact on mental health, the invisible silent threat of the pandemic, one we need to make sure that it is visible and address. Today, we pay tribute to all women as mothers, partners, daughters, sisters, who shine through the challenges of this pandemic and show us the way forward. Ladies and gentlemen, women are facing significant inequalities in access to healthcare within and between member states. This is very clear when it comes, for example, to cancer prevention, treatment and care. For example, coverage of the target population ranges from 6 to 90% for breast cancer screening across the EU, and from 25% to 80% for cervical cancer screening. These inequalities are not acceptable in a European Union that strives to represent all of its citizens equally. We need to have vision, but we also need to transform that into action. And this is why one of our main goals in our work through the European Health Union is to bridge these gaps and ensure equal access to healthcare for all women and girls. With dedicated funds under the EU for Health programme and other funding instruments, Europe's Beating Cancer Plan will support member states' efforts to extend routine vaccination against human papillomaviruses of girls and boys. The objective is to vaccinate at least 90% of the EU target population of girls and to significantly increase the vaccination of boys by 2030. We need to address inequalities to access in healthcare where sexual rights are concerned, to address the need to protect all women and girls against any type of abuse, to empower them to speak out, to address the challenges of women and girls surviving cancer, especially their reproductive rights. Ladies and gentlemen, this pandemic continues to disrupt our communities and our way of life. But it also presents us with opportunities to address long-standing weaknesses in our health systems and inequalities in our societies. I am determined that we grasp this opportunity so that together we make positive, lasting, and equitable changes. On this occasion, therefore on International Women's Day, we all, men and women, need to play our parts to the fullest, to foster greater equality in Europe and beyond, and empower in every way possible women and girls so that they continue to thrive, thus making Europe and the world a more equal, a safer place for all and inspiring generations to come. We need to rise to the challenge. We need to speak out, to make our voices heard for those among us whose voices are silenced or just not heard, because that is how we bring about change. Thank you very much, and I look forward to hearing your interventions.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Kyriakides. I would like just to underline that Commissioner Kyriakides has already mentioned on the impact of mental health due to the pandemic and also said that it is time to start acting. It is time to start acting on the healthcare issues. And by saying this, I would like to give the floor to another woman which is involved in politics, and she's having also a leading role in her own country, the Netherlands. Mrs. Mona Keizer is State Secretary, Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Policy in the Netherlands. And I would like to call you to take the floor. Thank you very much, Minister, for being with us.
Well, thank you very much, Maria, and good afternoon to everyone. We are living in extraordinary times. The virus that looms so large in our awareness has made our lives feel very small. Nevertheless, we are determined, adaptable, and innovative. So even when we feel small, think big. We as individuals don't have to be the ones who develop treatments or vaccines to be of great importance to each other in this time. And with that in mind, I've been listening with great respect to the women on this panel today. Each of you has a special story to tell. I don't believe we've ever met before, but that means there's all the more we can learn from each other. So I'm here today with an open mind, and I'm here because I too have a story to tell. A story about a fair economy, about women in business, and the importance of diversity. I'll begin by taking you back a few years. When I first took office as State Secretary for Economic Affairs, I was determined not to sit in an ivory tower, and I still am determined. After all, I chose to be of service to society. And society is not an abstract concept, because society is made of people, of women. And those people have real concerns and real causes that they are committed to, heart and soul. So I want to really see them. I want to know what's really important to them. I spent time talking to a lot of business people, major entrepreneurs, small business owners and startups. And I started to see a through line. I call that through line a fair economy. I saw that consumers and entrepreneurs of every stripe are often confronted with unfair situations. For example, unfair competitions in the platform economy or imbalances in consumer protection law. I also believe that a fair economy must be an accessible economy. Gender shouldn't play a role. Unfortunately, I found that women entrepreneurs have a hard time accessing capital than their male counterparts. And it's not always clear exactly why. Sometimes it's a question of self-confidence. Sometimes it's a matter of experience. And sometimes another party is the reason. For instance, because of bias. Bias is a problem that we can and must overcome. That's crucial. Because bias puts the brakes on growth, while diversity keeps it motoring along. And we need that now more than ever if we want our economy to recover. The more diverse a group is, the more perspectives, opinions, and experiences we can marshal to everyone's benefit. That's why, as State Secretary, I make sure that there are enough women in the committees within my ministry that allocate funds to companies. And that's why the Dutch House of Representatives has voted in favor of a quota for women in business. Because boardrooms aren't just for neckties. We need women as well as men at the top. Once the COVID crisis-19 is over, we will need everyone's input to find solutions to the challenges facing society in areas like climate change, healthcare, and education. And many of those challenges also present business opportunities. And that's exactly the kind of entrepreneurship that women are often involved in. Because businesses headed by women often focus on making an impact on the environment, the community, and society at large. Governments help create conditions for entrepreneurs to do business. That's why I'm laying the legal groundwork in the Netherlands for a new form of enterprise, one that isn't aiming pure at maximizing profit. I've set my sights on leveling the playing field for businesses with social or community-focused objectives. A playing field where women entrepreneurs have equal opportunities, both in theory, but more important, also in practice. Thank you very much and good luck.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kaiser. And I would like just to note that you have already established in the Netherlands a new form of enterprises, and you are working in order to allocate funds for women SMEs. So it is important sometimes to listen, to learn, and to adapt best practices when it comes to the ground. And by saying this, I would like to come up with Ambassador Maria Theophili. Ambassador Theophili is heading the permanent representative of Greece to the United Nations. As you all know, diplomacy is a very, very hard field, but sometimes women are leading, and now we have the case. Ambassador Theophili, the floor is yours. We are honored to have you with us.
Thank you. Thank you for very kind words. Dear Ambassador of Goodwill of UNESCO, Laureate of UN Nelson Mandela Prize 2020, President of Marianas Vaidinogiannis Foundation, distinguished speakers. I am thrilled to share this digital podium with you to speak on the occasion of International Women's Day at such an important event which touches upon a pressing issue, women in the era of the pandemic. As the permanent representative of Greece to the United Nations and as a woman, I have the opportunity to participate in a global effort to promote the objective of gender equality and to witness from the inside the international community's devotion to that goal. Women all over the world are facing similar difficulties that beg for common global response. Truth is, on the early days of the UN, women were few. It took quite some time for our voices to be heard. Yet today, women are here to stay. The United Nations are at the forefront of the battle of gender equality. The Secretary General of the Nations has more than once explicitly expressed his devotion to this cause by defining himself as a true feminist. It is in this spirit that for the first time in its history, the organization has succeeded in achieving gender parity on the highest level through appointments of the same number of female and male undersecretaries. In this vein, UN has established an entity entirely dedicated to the empowerment of women and girls, UN Women. UN Women supports all the countries in setting global standards for achieving gender equality and works with governments and civil society to design laws, policies, programs, and services needed. Yet, the most powerful forum for women within the UN system is without a doubt the Committee of the Status of Women, the principal global intergovernmental body exclusively dedicated to the promotion of gender equality established in 1946. Its yearly session is considered the biggest event in the UN calendar after the High Level Week, a wonderful, vibrant expression by thousands of women the world all over, a true celebration of plurality that only women can manifest. This year, the CSW will convene, unfortunately, virtual between 16 and 27 of March with a view to address women's full and effective participation in public life as well as the elimination of violence. When the pandemic hit, the world was put to a stop. In fact, countries, one after the other, started imposing lockdowns and closed the borders right before last year's CSW meeting in March 2020. The UN could not stand idle in view of this world-changing situation. It has immediately taken action to evaluate the situation and identify the particular ways women are hit by the pandemic. Right from early on, UN Women has underscored that with schools and caretaking facilities closed, women had to quit their jobs in order to focus on the younger members of the family. It also pointed out that the vast majority of positions women occupy, namely the service sector, are in risk of being lost by the subsequent lockdowns. The UN has also raised awareness on the issue of domestic violence, the so-called shadow pandemic. Besides women, other aspects in the pandemic, the way mothers, wives organize the household in any corner of the world in order to ensure that its members will remain safe and healthy. After all, in the unfortunate event of a member of the family being tested positive, it is the mothers and the wives that will take all the necessary measures to isolate that person and, of course, lovingly provide all the care required. Last but not least, the organization has taken bold initiatives that put forth ambitious policies recommendations in the following three cross-cutting priorities: ensure women's equal representation in all COVID-19 response planning and decision-making, drive transformative change for equality by addressing the care economy, paid and unpaid, and target women and girls in all efforts to address the socio-economic impact of COVID-19. In a nutshell, in the heart of the UN approach is that recovery, building back better, should be the chance for a more gender-equal world. Greece has a unique place in this debate. Building on our rich democratic history and the advancements Greek society has achieved during the last decades in the matter, we are in a position to talk about our proper experience, share best practices, as well as inspire other countries in the quest of gender equality. Indeed, Greece, within the UN, is proud to be constructively present in all the endeavors that aim at promoting the status of women within the context of the pandemic. We participate actively for the adoption of ambitious resolutions leading to an ever stronger engagement of state actors, United Nations bodies, as well as civil society to address the effects of the pandemic to women and girls globally and to promote gender-responsive measures. The permanent mission of Greece is engaged in the group of friends of countries to combat violence against women, as well as in the group of friends for the promotion of gender parity. We have organized, together with our partners, numerous events that shed light to gender equality. Of particular importance was the event on the dangers that women reporters are facing in armed conflicts. Together with civil society, we have organized a panel on women and criminal mediation in innovative concept that started in the north of Greece, aiming at supporting the effective rehabilitation of a perpetrator of gender-based violence, thus contributing to a safer society. With a view to promote the unique image of women in the world of business, we have co-sponsored a roundtable on the contribution of social entrepreneurship in women liberation in the Balkan region and beyond. We also strive to raise awareness on other topics that are dear to us and merit our attention, such as trafficking or the challenges of the digital era for women journalists. This year, on the occasion of the CSW, together with Cyprus, Spain, and Jordan, we are organizing a virtual roundtable on violence against women, a barrier to the meaningful and full participation of women in public life. Vice Minister of Labor and Social Affairs, Mrs. Maria Sirengela, who is present here, will lead the Greek delegation in the forthcoming CSW and will also be one of the main speakers in the affronted mentioned side event. We are also organizing a side event in order to highlight the role of women in the research of the vaccine against COVID-19, inspired by the numerous women, some of them Greek, that have helped the global endeavors to find a remedy. I would like to conclude with a final bold remark. In our language, alas is a female noun and proudly so. Happy International Women's Day. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you very much, first of all, for your excellent work in terms of representing our home country, Greece, in the United Nations, but also for the work you are doing on the issue of gender equality. And allow me to keep from your speech just one phrase: women are here to stay. And by saying this, I would like to pass the floor to Dr. Helena Doom. Helena Doom is an ophthalmologist. She is also the first recipient of the inaugural United Nations Nelson Mandela Award for 2015. Mrs. Doom, Madame Doom, the floor is yours, and thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you so much. It is true, we are here to stay. Mrs. Mariana Vardinoyannis, Goodwill Ambassador of UNESCO, United Nations Nelson Mandela Award 2020, and President of Mariana Vardinoyannis Foundation. Fellow distinguished presenters, ladies and gentlemen, I feel honored and humbled to have been invited to this important meeting to be one of the presenters on the effects of COVID-19 pandemic on women. Directors of ceremonies, please allow me to first congratulate Mrs. Mariana Vardinoyannis on her very well-deserved United Nations Nelson Mandela Award 2020. Congratulations. The COVID-19 pandemic has unleashed immeasurable suffering and crisis to the world, more so to the developing countries, and has further exposed the weaknesses of our health systems. Unfortunately, the impact of the COVID-19 on socio-economic structures is not gender neutral. As experience has shown us, women tend to bear the brunt of the impact of any crisis, and COVID-19 pandemic is no exception. The factors I would like to highlight for the case of Namibia are social, health, and economic impact. The social impact are domestic violence increased tremendously. In my country, Namibia, the number of rape cases went up. During the long periods of forced lockdown, the most painful thing is that the children who are more vulnerable were being raped by their relatives. Some even became pregnant at that tender age. Namibia in general has a high sexual gender-based violence. Hardly a month passes by without a case being reported of a woman being killed by a partner. During the enforced lockdown, the media started to report an increase in sexual gender-based violence, of which the victims are women and young girls. The nerve center of this was in the informal settlements, where the houses are overcrowded. We usually do not understand what the restriction of movement does to a household that share a space as small as 6 square meters. Without a place to go to, people are forced to be crammed into a small space, which raises mental stress. Another contributing factor to the stress is the high consumption of alcohol. A number of the rape and assault cases go unreported, as often the victims are economically dependent on the men. In many instances, where cases are reported to the authorities, women end up withdrawing them for fear of further violence. The pandemic further exacerbated the situation where there were places of safety for women and children, they now became inaccessible. Government needs to ensure that places of refuge remain accessible and are adequately funded. COVID-19 has also sadly negatively impacted on young girls. During the same enforced lockdown between March and July 2020, it was reported that 3,300 school girls got pregnant and most did not return to school. This is pathetic. Namibia has a policy of not expelling pregnant girls from school, but because of fear and stigma, they do not return. We all know that this situation leads to a vicious cycle of pandemic-induced poverty. The fact that the girls got pregnant is clear that they were not using protection, and they also have contracted sexual transmitted diseases such as HIV. It is therefore crucial that issues of prevention of teenage pregnancies and retention in school should they get pregnant need to be addressed from the grassroots to parliament level. Necessary laws need to be enacted and enforced. Health service delivery. COVID-19 has also negatively impacted the health service delivery. Many of the essential services were put on hold, such as outreach programs to the rural areas. For example, the blindness prevention program, which I'm involved with together with See International, has not conducted outreach service since the onset of COVID-19. We have not yet done a study, but from experience, there is a number of people becoming blind from causes that can be prevented, such as cataract removal. A high number of those who go blind because of things like cataract are women. And we know that in rural areas, women are the primary caregivers and food producers. They make a living from land. So without seeing, they cannot produce anything, and therefore the income lost and availability of food is reduced. The COVID-19 pandemic has pushed the world into recession to the extent that economists are calling it an economic crisis. In a country like mine, where the majority of women are in informal sectors, they are adversely affected by the loss of income. The enforced lockdowns have resulted in women not being able to make a living. The informal markets were closed down. Tourists to whom many sell their products were no more coming into the country. Many construction sites stopped, as it was at these places that women sold their food. Majority of people who work in hospitality industry are women, and many of them lost their jobs during the lockdowns. A number of those institutions have not recovered yet. Some are permanently closed down. Government provided a general stimulus benefit, but it remains to be seen how much of that went to women. In all spheres of life, COVID-19 has further pushed those who already disadvantaged, women and girls, into unprecedented suffering. And it is really suffering. In conclusion, this pandemic has taught us a lot about how we live as society. Before the pandemic, women were already in vulnerable positions. What the pandemic did was strip away the voluntary ignorance for these issues. The system of keeping women on the fringe of the economy, health, and social debates is a system that cannot be sustained, and now, more than ever, needs to be done away with. Women are the backbone of the Namibian society, or I should say, the backbone of any society. Safeguarding and empowering them is the key to prosperity of any developing countries. I would like to thank Mrs. Mariana Vardinovatis to have invited me to this important meeting so that I can present my female colleagues in the world about the plight of the suffering Namibian women. I thank you.
We thank you, Dr. Helena Doom. It is extremely important that you have sent a strong and clear message that girls and women in Namibia needs our support. Thank you very much for your emotional speech. It's very important for all of us to understand that in Namibia there is the highest sexual gender-based violence, and there's also a high consumption of alcohol. The society is suffering, and especially girls and women, so we have to act. And by saying this, I would like to pass the floor to our last speaker for today. It is Madame Gabriela Ramos. She is the Assistant Director General of the Sector of Social and Human Sciences of UNESCO. Thank you very much for being with us. I would like just to remind that we have to stick on time because our session must finish at 17:35. Once again, thank you very much for finding the time to be with us.
Can you hear me?
Yes, of course we can hear you.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you to the Vardinoyanis invitation. Thank you for the very powerful Greek women here in the, and of course, their international invitees. I think that how long do I have to, because you get me going into gender issue, I might take 20 minutes. So how long do I have?
I think that you have approximately 5 minutes.
Perfect. Okay. Well, I was told to bring some of the facts, and we know that we have been tracking facts in UNESCO about gender gaps in all the domains, in the labor force participation, the wage gap, in the question of certain professions, in the question of being represented at top of managerial level in the public, in the private sector, on the question of girls going to certain disciplines or not. I was in a panel of artificial intelligence. We are documenting how much women are absent from this very important developments, technologically speaking. But more importantly, I also want to say that even if progress was slow, we were seeing some progress. We were seeing that the gender gap was diminishing, and we are now around 13% in the most advanced economies, even though some economies still have 20-25% gender gap in terms of wages. And we also see gaps in labor force participation. There has been progress, but it's still not yet there. So we were trying, I have to say, we were trying. And the gender equality work by UN Women and all the institutions of the United Nations system that want to push the agenda forward were making progress. Then the crisis struck. And the crisis struck with the force and with the real clarity to underpin the vulnerabilities and the differences that we live as men and women in this world. We know that the crisis has been a female crisis. Of course, it affected everybody. I cannot deny that. And we are really sad by all the casualties and all the pain and sorrow that it has been to many families. But the reality is that the sectors that have been affected economically are those where women are overrepresented, different from what happened in the 2008 crisis. The health sector by itself is full of women that are really fighting the pandemic because they make 70% of health workforce, but they make 90% of the nurses and 90% of the care economy, meaning taking care of children or taking care of the elderly. And therefore, it has been really balanced. It has really unbalanced, and we know that the crisis is pushing back the progress we have made in so many areas. And then the worst manifestation of this crisis, and I'm sure that you all have discussed it, is the question of violence. And I would say, as my colleagues in the UN Women tell us, don't say violence. It's men violence against women. That's the way we should call it, because it's exactly how it happens. And we know there are 30%, 40%, 60% increase in gender-based violence. And I think this really important that we take conscious that if any, the crisis just show how unprepared we were in terms of gender equality. There are good news, of course, there are good news, because I see that more and more women in senior positions taking a stand to go for more gender equality, which was not the case before. We had many women taking positions, important positions, and not going into supporting other women. This is really, really great step forward. That's why I'm very fond of being here with the Madame Vardovianis. That's one, the question of Me Too movements, the transparency that they wrote. They are shocking, they are really sad, but the reality is that they are changing the context in which impunity was just rampant, and nobody would care about the kind of extortions, the kind of harassments, and the kind of situations that women have to face in the labor force, but also in their house and in many activities. So there are progress, and there are progress also in the sense that we know what works and what doesn't. And I would say, let's start by the laws. Let's start making gender equality mandatory. Let's ensure that our laws and our institutions are not just preserving the inequalities that we see everywhere. Let's go for mandatory quotas. Let's go for target decisions in terms of how much we need women at the top. Because having women at the top is not only good for companies or for the governments, it's good for everybody, because you bring diversity and you're actually taking advantage of the increased skills and the increased level of education that women are showing by themselves. And so there are many other instruments that I would not be able to put in front of you, but I want to tell you one of the aspects that really concerns us, UNESCO particularly, is the question of gender biases and stereotypes. And dealing with us, dealing with the instruments, dealing with incentives, dealing with this knowledge, and making everybody aware of the disparities needs to be also advanced, fighting the stereotypes and fighting the gender balance and fighting the biases. And for this, we are launching a role model network. I will invite all on the 22nd of March, because we need to tell girls that they can be. We need to tell women that they can be. We need to provide with this self-confidence for them to succeed, to be autonomous and independent, and to fulfill their potential. So these are the kind of issues that we're working now at UNESCO, and we will be very happy to partner with, to advance with you, and to ensure that our future are more equal, more sustainable, and more inclusive than it's been up to now.
Well, once again, thank you very much, Madame Ramos. Your speech was very important. I would like to keep from this that we have to work on making the gender equality mandatory. And by saying this, we are going to conclude our session in the European Parliament. I would like just to say that it is very important for all of us to participate in such high-profile event. I would like once again to thank Madame Mariana Vardinogiannis for organizing this event and the Mariana Vardinogiannis Foundation. And I would like just to keep as a take off two things. First, that we have to go ahead with action. And second, we are women and we are here to stay. Once again, thank you very much. We are now going to the next panel. Before this, I would like to say that we had in the program a keynote speech coming from Professor Fotini Pazardzis. Mrs. Pazardzis is a chairperson in the United Nations Human Rights Committee, and now she has a flexible obligation, so we have to postpone her keynote speech maybe by the end of the next session. Once again, thank you very much, and have a nice evening from the European Parliament. Bye-bye from Brussels.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for the International Women's Day Virtual Roundtable. I am Andriana Paraskevopoulou, anchor woman for the ERT, the Hellenic Broadcaster, and I know that it's a great day for all women around the world because we know how strong we are, how we fight for everything, and how we can achieve the impossible. That's why I would like to call upon Mrs. Domna Michailidou. She's Deputy Minister of Labour and Social Affairs of the Hellenic Republic. Kalispera σας κύριε Υπουργέ, because she knows better from anyone how difficult it is to be a woman, to be a minister, and how some years ago that would be like fiction and not reality. Κυρία Michailidou, παρακαλώ.
Kalispera. Good afternoon, everyone, and a big, warm, wholehearted thank you to Ms. Mariana Vardinogiannis, the whole MVV Foundation, and of course you, Mrs. Paraskevopoulou, for this incredible and much-needed roundtable. I must admit that the pluralism and heterogeneity of all discussions contributes to what we currently need most, an honest, polyphonic discussion on where now and where we're off to next. So I saw in your video as well, but I think that most of the participants here are well accustomed to the ILO data on how COVID-19 and the associated lockdowns have seriously impacted economic activity, affecting at least 80% of the total global workforce. The resultant instability affects the livelihoods of men, children, and women alike of all ages. However, though, women are disproportionately harmed by the current pandemic, as it exacerbates present inequalities reflected in society and the labor market. It presents new challenges and sets back recent achievements. Therefore, while the ultimate objective should be, and actually has been, the alleviation of the negative economic impact, governments across the globe, as our own, should not neglect to design and implement policies in the current pandemic and beyond. During the pandemic, women, us, have emerged as either champions, as many of them or us were around medical services, or victims of a social dynamic that has frozen their social prerogatives or at times has even reversed their social positioning. The pandemic has unfortunately affected economic activity of women in several ways, via lower income, but also in employment in mostly hit sectors such as the entertainment sector, tourism, and retail, sectors in which teleworking is close to impossible. Furthermore, lockdowns and the consequent restrictions on movement and school closures have re-established the traditional roles of women in the household, further depressing their economic position and opportunities. Women have stepped back some decades during these past months and have significantly reinstalled their position as carers of dependent household members. To be more precise, women in the labor market who have children or need to take care of the now more vulnerable elderly need to work from home, when and if possible, while catering for the others. These overarching issues are likely to have longer-term impacts on women's welfare if left untreated. And as a response, we, the current Greek government, have designed and implemented a wide array of measures to tackle each specific negative impact. I'll briefly, but not exhaustively, mention some of these measures. First of all, recognizing the additional needs resulting from the dependent members of the household, such as children or people with disabilities or the elderly, we have designed and implemented a wide special purpose leave scheme for working mothers. According to it, parents with children, with or without disabilities or dependents, would be able to be absent from work to take care of them while not losing much needed income. Additionally, aiming to support families with children, we have implemented two bundles of measures. One, on the one hand, we have reduced costs for families by reducing taxes related to the upbringing of children, and on the other hand, we have expanded the provision of financial support. We adopted, and I'm proud to say that within 6 months of assuming office here in my office, we have designed, legislated, and applied a new type of benefit, a childbirth allowance of €2,000 for every newborn child in Greece. And that, of course, in addition to all existing child benefits and the emergency COVID-related benefits to poorer households with kids. Our strongest policy intervention, though, is to ensure that women will remain or re-enter the labor force. Thus, we increased this year funds to strengthen supply-side services. And what I mean by that, nurseries, especially pertaining early childhood education programs. In a very difficult fiscal year, as I'm sure you're all aware, we increased the budget of nurseries by 17%, lowering the income criteria by 33%. I must admit, honestly, that the Greek government is really keen on this program, and we expect it to have significant economic impacts on the child development itself, the household disposable income, but also overall macroeconomic activity in the country. In the coming months, we want to take this a step further by developing the services for children and their families through the creation of a comprehensive curriculum for preschool education. Before I conclude my speech, I would like to talk about the contribution of women on the front lines of hedging against the pandemic. We are very fortunate and lucky to have with us Dr. Kotanidou, who can verify that women are significantly overrepresented in what is recognized as essential social and healthcare services. More specifically, it's estimated that 70% of employees in the healthcare sector are women, 80 to 82% of front desk employees are women, and 95% of professional caretakers are women. Taking this into account, it can easily be claimed that the pandemic highlighted the role of women in the labor market, while during the past months, women saw all this unprecedented rise in workload, health risk, and challenges to their work-life balance. Undoubtedly, COVID-19 posed a threat on maintaining the gains made in the past decades. Across every sphere, the economy, to social protection, the impact of COVID-19 is exacerbated for women and girls by virtue of our sex. It is our role as a Greek government to take measures, design, and apply policies so as to constantly empower women and girls, whether they decide to stay at home or attempt to enter or re-enter the labor market. Personally, as Deputy Minister of Labour and Social Affairs and as a woman, I'm determined to take any necessary policy action, to continue taking any necessary policy action to make sure that women arrive at this new state more empowered to reach our highest potential. Thank you very much for the invite and again for organizing such an incredible initiative and dialogue. Thank you.
Mrs. Michailidou, thank you so much, and you are so right that we have to think where we started and where we want to go. And yes, women has accomplished a lot of things, but you know, it's always one way to do the best and to do better things. So thank you so much. And I would like to view with you the aspect of Mrs. Maria Sirengela. She's Deputy Minister of Labour and Social Affairs, responsible for demography and family of the Hellenic Republic.
I would really like to be with you, but today, honouring Women's Rights Day, my obligations in Parliament do not allow me to do so. I would like to thank the Mariana Vardinogiannis Foundation and Mrs. Vardinogianni personally for the invitation. Above all, I thank and congratulate you for taking the initiative to provoke public debate so that the state and its citizens can reposition themselves on the important issue that has emerged from the experience of the pandemic and the consequences of crisis on women and girls in modern societies. Unfortunately, women of the 21st century in Greece have experienced a deep crisis not only this year, the year of the pandemic, but for 13 years. I am referring to the previous economic crisis which developed as a social, moral and finally crisis of values. Thus, in relation to the women of the rest of the EU countries, our efforts to gain or stabilize already acquired rights have met many obstacles. At the General Secretariat for Demographic and Family Policy and Gender Equality, where I had the honour of serving first as a Secretary General and now as the Deputy Minister of Labour and Social Affairs, we have concluded that women were affected by the economic and current health crisis mainly due to the precarious positions in the economic activity and life. As we have repeatedly said, we do not lack the legal arsenal. We have excellent laws that guarantee rights, that protect or encourage, and we have solidarity, or we hope so, in the field of political and social forces. Nevertheless, we have limited effectiveness, and this is not only due to the deep-rooted Greek stereotypes about the potential of women, but also to the opportunities that sometimes the state gives to women to become stronger. Let me not make too much reference on how much women have been affected by the pandemic, but I would like to mention what we did about the women in the pandemic. According to the data available to us, both from the SOS line 15900 and from the counseling centers of the General Secretariat for Demographic and Family Policy and Gender Equality, the reported cases of domestic violence and gender violence raised during the lockdown. In terms of employment circumstances, as I mentioned above, women and girls are employed in precarious employment relationships as they are numerically superior to those who work informally and in vulnerable sectors. In addition, the job loss rate for women is 1.5 times higher than that of men. So I want to focus on how the government today is trying to strengthen women. First of all, by setting rules and monitoring compliance in the way of we set rules for employment, equal pay for equal work, access to health and social security services, rules for work from home in both the public and private sectors, special purpose permits, protections from violence and harassment in every area, especially in the workplace. We encourage self-employed even for women who belong to vulnerable groups, such as women victims of violence, by scoring a new adapted programs in collaboration with OIF. We protect motherhood, fatherhood, and set a new framework for child custody and paternal leave for both parents and caregivers. Thus, no employer will be able to deny work to women because they have to raise their children. Maternity leave for women, respectively paternity leave for men. We also protect refugee and immigrant women victims of gender-based violence, and we form them with clear instructions in their languages. During lockdowns, we provide, in collaboration with the Hellenic Chamber of Hotels, temporary shelters, free accommodation and food to women victims of violence and women living in poverty, immigrant women and vulnerable situations, along with free medical examinations when required for them and their children through the Hellenic Forensic Medicine Society and the Smile of the Child. The European Commission has highlighted what I just mentioned to you as two good practices of Greece in dealing with the effects of the pandemic on gender equality. I would also like to say a few words regarding the current issue, the Greek movement of Me Too, and I will say that despite this tragedy of the incidents that filled us with admiration for the brave voices of the brave women who came forward speaking, and also filled us with anger for the hated perpetrators, the days we live in are historic for the women's issue, because we are now clearly clarifying the boundaries that are usually either vague or deliberately circumvented in the name of power. This is the end of all authoritarian relations. The society clearly stated through the voice of Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis that we stand with the victims. The state stressed that it severely punishes the perpetrators and that it does not prescribe offences. In addition, begins the systematic education of children on issues of sex education, diversity and tolerance. I would like to close by saying that every society's concern is the well-being of its members and its overall development. Both we go through gender equality. That is why it is worth fighting. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And yes, about the Me Too, all victims should talk, should not be afraid, because the society is now ready to hear them and is ready to believe them. So this is a chance to do something better than all the years before. Thank you, Mrs. Syringella, and I would like to call upon Mrs. Miledi Stumbu. She's chairwoman in Business Committee, American Hellenic Chamber of Commerce, and it must be very difficult to combine for women to be also the best in business in the year of COVID-19.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you very much for the honor of being in such a great company today. Warmest thanks to the Mariana Vardinogianni Foundation for the kind invitation. Indeed, the past year has been a year unlike any other. Under the highly, challenging circumstances of COVID-19, our world has been turned upside down. And while the impact of the pandemic varies from country to country, it is affecting societies and businesses at their core, and it is expected to increase inequalities on a global scale. Women have been negatively impacted. It is often said that this crisis is a female crisis. 1 week ago, the European Commission shared some data about how COVID-19 pandemic has increased gender disparities. And based on those data, out of 49 million of care workers in the EU that are most exposed to the virus, around 76% are women. But it's not only that. There are several reports that show that women are more vulnerable during the COVID crisis, stalling their careers, risking losing their jobs and jeopardizing their financial security. The pandemic has intensified challenges that women already faced. Working mothers have always worked a double shift, a full day at work, followed by long hours of household labor and taking care of children. Now, the supports that made this possible, like school and childcare, have been appended. Last spring, American Hellenic Chamber of Commerce, together with the Women in Business Committee, has conducted a survey to measure the impact of the pandemic in daily life and work. And we did this through an online questionnaire that we shared with the database of the Chamber and the members of the Chamber. Almost 1 in 2 women engaged more in household activities during the pandemic, while this was the case with only 2 out of 10 men. Under the conditions of uncertainty and crisis, women are even more strongly undertaking their traditional role. The survey also showed that men perceive that they contribute much more to housework than was respectively recognized by women. While men readily perceive that their contribution to housework is equal to that of women, women, on the other hand, do not share this perception, and they state that men contribute equally to household at much lower level than men do. Housework is done by women without a call for recognition. Their contribution to home and family is socially invisible, while with men, even the smallest engagement with domestic work is magnified because it falls outside the masculine role. Although women have conquered so many previously male-dominated fields, men have not equally embraced traditionally feminine workloads. Regarding the impact of the pandemic on work, the survey respondent stated that the consequences of the pandemic will affect everyone. However, it is thought that women will face higher unemployment and will be significantly impacted more than men in the relation to their future prospects. And actually, this is the realization of the glass ceiling for women. The results of our survey were actually very consistent with what international surveys show as well. Based on the McKinsey Women in the Workplace 2020 report that was issued last September, 1 in 3 mothers are considering to leave the workplace or seriously downshift their careers because of COVID. And not surprisingly, senior level women are significantly more likely than men to feel burnt out, under pressure to work more, or as though they have to be always on. They are also considering leaving the workforce or downshifting their careers, citing burnout as the main reason. As we look forward, the time has come to make post-pandemic recovery a chance to advance women's rights. As we seek to rebuild economy and society, we need to do it in a different way. We need to aim for women empowerment that would entail economic independence, equal opportunities for education and jobs, pay equity, and work-life balance. And in this journey, we see 3 major opportunities. The first opportunity comes with recovery, needing to take into consideration the acceleration of digital technology adoption. In a few months' time, the crisis has brought about years of change in how government organizations and businesses do business across all sectors. The fast-paced digitization of citizen, customer, and supply chain interactions, the increased share of digital products and services have accelerated 3 to 5 years. And while this trend will continue, the need for talent with advanced technological skills will increase. It is of primary importance that women are not left behind in this process. As per European Commission data, only 16.4% of digital specialists in Greece working in the digital sector are women, when the deficit in talent in the digital sector is counting hundreds of thousands of jobs across Europe. We need to focus our efforts to encourage girls to pursue studies in science and technology, to support female founders to grow their digital business, to empower more women to participate in the digital economy. The second opportunity is connected with work-life balance and comes with the emergence of remote work. Despite the short-term impact of combining one family while restrained at home, the opportunity for more flexibility can definitely support in the longer term more women to combine effectively a career and their family and private life. The option for a flexible working arrangement provides greater possibilities for entering the labor market, retaining full-time jobs, or striking a better work-life balance, something that is very important for women. Actually, nearly half of part-time workers in the EU, most of them are currently women, indicate they would be willing to switch to a full-time job if they were offered more flexibility. So we need to focus our efforts into developing a regulatory framework that would support a more flexible working arrangement for the women who need it. Finally, there's the leadership element. Over the past months, we have experienced glimmers of how this pandemic is making companies more human. Most companies focusing on taking care of their employees, ensuring they are safe, they are healthy. They pledged to retain employees. Other companies offered bonuses to support equipment for home office or homeschooling. Some extended caregiving leaves or even offered COVID relief leaves for their employees. Others announced and launched well-being programs to support their employees' mental health. Through these acts, large or small, organizations are showing that the new leadership paradigm is no longer that of command of control. In the midst of adversity, organizations are becoming people-centric, putting their employees in the center of everything they do. And women leaders can play a big role here. Within the past year, we celebrated the election of the first president of the Hellenic Republic, the first female vice president in the United States, and several more female leaders in politics, in science, and in business. Having women in leadership positions should become the norm, not the exception. Companies with gender diversity on executive teams are more likely to embrace employee-friendly policies and programs and to champion gender equality. And women leaders more often take a public stand for gender equity at work. They're more likely to mentor and sponsor other women. They act as role models. They inspire. They empower. Today, women are made for science, for technology, for business, for service. Women are fit to lead. Women are proving that career and family can go together. This year's International Women's Day is for all women, either in the front line of this pandemic or at the back office. It is for scientists. It is for mothers who took care of children while working from home. It is for all of us who do not want to settle for inequality. It is for all of us who choose to challenge stereotypes and bias. Women must be at the center of recovery for Greece. It matters for us and for our daughters. It matters for our future. Thank you.
Thank you so much for inspiring us. And yes, the numbers, there is always truth in the numbers, so they show how difficult it is for women in the pandemic. Thank you so much for your speech. And I would like to call upon now Mrs. Anastasia Kotanidou, Professor of Pulmonology and Intensive Care. And before you start your speech, I would like to say thank you. Thank you for being in the front line for all of us. Σας ευχαριστούμε πολύ.
Καλησπέρα σας. Επειδή θέλω να μιλήσω για την γυναίκα στην Ελλάδα και για την ισότητα της γυναίκας, γι' αυτό προτιμώ η ομιλία μου να είναι στα ελληνικά, γιατί θεωρώ ότι η γλώσσα μας είναι πολύ πιο πλούσια από οποιαδήποτε άλλη γλώσσα. Και θα ήθελα να ευχαριστήσω το Σύλλογο Ελπίδα και προσωπικά την κυρία Μαριάννα Βαρδινογιάννη για αυτή την εξαιρετική πρωτοβουλία και θα ξεκινήσω με τα λόγια μιας γυναίκας. Αν είσαι πολύ μικρή, έχεις πολύ λίγη εμπειρία. Αν είσαι μεγάλη, έχεις εμπειρία, αλλά σκέφτεσαι να κάνεις οικογένεια. Αν πάλι το έχεις περάσει αυτό το στάδιο, θα έχεις θέματα επειδή έχεις οικογένεια. Δηλαδή, δεν μπορείς να τους βρεις πουθενά. Με αυτά τα λόγια περιέγραψε στους ερευνητές τις έμφυλες διακρίσεις που εξακολουθούν να υφίστανται οι γυναίκες στην ελληνική αγορά εργασίας, μία από τις πρωτοερωτήσεις στην έρευνα που διεξήχθη το 2019 από την Alba Graduate Business School. Όπως προκύπτει για ακόμα μία φορά από τα δεδομένα αυτής της έρευνας, η πλειονότητα των γυναικών στην Ελλάδα, δηλαδή το 67% περίπου, έχει βιώσει διακρίσεις λόγω φύλου στο εργασιακό της χώρο. Σύμφωνα με τα δεδομένα αυτής της έρευνας, 4 στις 10 γυναίκες απάντησαν ότι έχουν κληθεί συχνά κατά τη διάρκεια συνέντευξης να απαντήσουν στην ερώτηση για την οικογενειακή τους κατάσταση. 7 στις 10 έχουν βρεθεί σε αυτή τη θέση τουλάχιστον κάποιες φορές. Σήμερα οι γυναίκες στην Ελλάδα έχουν τα ίδια δικαιώματα πρόσβασης με τους άντρες στην δωρεάν δημόσια εκπαίδευση όλων των βαθμίδων της χώρας. Η ισότητα αυτή δεν ίσχυε βέβαια από την ίδρυση του νεοελληνικού κράτους το 1830, αλλά επιτεύχθηκε σταδιακά μετά από μεγάλο αγώνα από την πλευρά των γυναικών και μερικών επιφανών ανδρών. Το 1897 αποφυτά με άριστα η πρώτη γυναίκα γιατρός, η Αγγελική Παναγιωτάτου, από την Ιατρική Σχολή Αθηνών. Είναι η πρώτη γιατρός στην Ελλάδα. Η γυναικεία παρουσία στην Ιατρική Σχολή Αθηνών συνοδεύτηκε βέβαια από πολλά κακεντρεχή σχόλια, όπως το περίφημο σχόλιο στην κουζίνα. Η Αγγελική Παναγιωτάτου όμως δεν εγκαταλείπει τις σπουδές της, αλλά καταφέρνει το 1938 να γίνει η πρώτη έκτακτη καθηγήτρια υγιεινής και τροπικής παθολογίας στην Ελλάδα. Αυτό ήταν κάτι το οποίο το 1929 θεσμοθετείται η ισότιμη πρόσβαση των γυναικών στο δημόσιο εκπαιδευτικό σύστημα, αλλά η κοινωνική αποδοχή του θεσμού γίνεται δυστυχώς μετά από αρκετά χρόνια. Αυτή η χρονιά αποτελεί σταθμό για την εκπαίδευση των γυναικών στην Ελλάδα, διότι επιτέλους πραγματοποιήθηκε η εξομοίωση της εκπαίδευσης των κοριτσιών με τα αγόρια και εκείνη η χρονιά γεννήθηκε η συνεκπαίδευση και καταργείται η διαφοροποίηση των σπουδών μεταξύ αγοριών και κοριτσιών. Αξίζει να αναφερθεί ότι οι Ελληνίδες, οι οποίες αποτελούν την πλειονότητα του ελληνικού πληθυσμού, δηλαδή το 52% από τον ελληνικό πληθυσμό αναφέρεται στις γυναίκες, αντιμετωπίζουν πολλά προβλήματα όσον αφορά την ενσωμάτωση στις κοινωνικές και οικονομικές δομές. Γι' αυτό το λόγο δεν θα πρέπει να θεωρούνται ως μια ειδική ή ευάλωτη κοινωνική ομάδα. Υπό αυτή την έννοια, η ελληνική κυβέρνηση έχει δεσμευτεί για την διασφάλιση και την προώθηση των συμφερόντων των γυναικών. Παρά το γεγονός πως στην Ελλάδα το 34,2% των γυναικών ηλικίας 30 με 34 ετών έχει ολοκληρώσει πανεπιστημιακές σπουδές, ενώ το αντίστοιχο ποσοστό στους άντρες ανέρχεται στο 27%, η συμμετοχή των γυναικών σε θέσεις ευθύνης στις επιχειρήσεις εμφανίζει σημαντικά χαμηλότερα ποσοστά σε σχέση με τους άντρες. Σύμφωνα με στοιχεία της Ευρωπαϊκής Ένωσης, στην Ελλάδα, η συμμετοχή των γυναικών στα διοικητικά συμβούλια μεγάλων επιχειρήσεων ανέρχεται μόλις στο 8,4%. Ενώ το μέσο όρο στο επίπεδο της Ευρωπαϊκής Ένωσης αυτό είναι 17,8%. Η περιορισμένη μόνο αξιοποίηση γυναικών υψηλών προσόντων συνιστά σπατάλη πόρων, απώλεια πολύτιμου ταλέντου και προοπτικής οικονομικής ανάπτυξης. Σε επίπεδο θέσης ευθύνης, τα στοιχεία είναι ακόμα χειρότερα και αποκαλυπτικά. Σύμφωνα με την ετήσια έκθεση της Ευρωπαϊκής Επιτροπής για την Ισότητα των Φύλων, ο μέσος όρος των γυναικών στα ΔΣ των μεγαλύτερων εισηγμένων στην Ευρώπη εταιριών, των 28, ήταν για το 2018 μόλις περίπου 24%. Τα υψηλότερα ποσοστά καταγράφονται στη Γαλλία, Σουηδία, Ιταλία, ενώ η χώρα μας είναι τρίτη από το τέλος σε αυτές τις καταγραφές. Τα στοιχεία του Ευρωπαϊκού Ινστιτούτου για την Ισότητα των Φύλων για το πρώτο εξάμηνο το 19 καταγράφουν μία μικρή αύξηση και το ποσοστό φαίνεται να έρχεται στο 10% περίπου. Μέσα σε όλα αυτά, οι γυναίκες έρχονται συχνά αντιμέτωπες με περιστατικά βίας και επανόχλησης στην εργασία. Αν και από τα ευρήματα της έρευνας προκύπτει ότι υπάρχει ασάφεια σε σχέση με το τι ορίζεται σεξουαλική παρενόχληση, οι γυναίκες γίνονται αποδέκτριες συμπεριφορών και χειρονομιών που δεν νιώθουν πάντα ότι μπορούν να αξιολογήσουν, πολύ περισσότερο να εκφράσουν τη δυσκαρέσκειά τους για αυτές. Παράλληλα, μόλις 3 στις 10 επιχειρήσεις εφαρμόζουν προγράμματα εκπαίδευσης των εργαζομένων για την πρόληψη της βίας και της σεξουαλικής παρενόχλησης. Και αυτό την ώρα που σε πρόσφατη έρευνα αναφερόταν ότι το 40% των Ελληνίδων έχει πέσει θύματα σεξουαλικής παρενόχλησης, ενώ στο 63% από τις περιπτώσεις αυτή η παρενόχληση έχει λάβει χώρα αποκλειστικά στο χώρο εργασίας τους. Βάσει ερευνητικών δεδομένων, η σεξουαλική παρενόχληση είναι πιο διαδεδομένη στις γυναίκες πανεπιστημιακής μόρφωσης και στις γυναίκες που ανήκουν σε ανώτερες επαγγελματικές ομάδες. 75% των γυναικών στην κατηγορία των διευθυντικών στελεχών και το 74% των γυναικών στην κατηγορία των ειδικευμένων επαγγελματιών έχουν πέσει θύματα σεξουαλικής παρενόχλησης, σε σύγκριση με το 44% των γυναικών στην επαγγελματική κατηγορία εξειδικευμένη εργάτρια σε χειρονακτική εργασία. Η διαφορά αυτή που προκύπτει μπορεί να οφείλεται σε παράγοντες όπως η καλύτερη ενημέρωση των γενικών επαγγελματιών σχετικά με το τι συνιστά σεξουαλική παρενόχληση, καθώς και η έκθεση των επαγγελματιών γυναικών σε εργασιακά περιβάλλοντα και καταστάσεις που διατρέχουν αυξημένο κίνδυνο κακοποίησης. Ο κίνδυνος απόλυσης ίσως αποτελεί μία ακόμα αιτία για την μη αναφορά περιστατικών σεξουαλικής παρενόχλησης, ιδιαίτερα για τις γυναίκες σε χαμηλόβαθμες θέσεις. Παραδοσιακά γυναικεία χαρακτηριστικά, όπως η αφοσίωση, το ενδιαφέρον, η ευαισθησία για τις ανάγκες των άλλων, η επίλυση προβλημάτων και συγκρούσεων, ουσιαστικά περιγράφουν μια ολιστική προσέγγιση στην ηγεσία τόσο για τις γυναίκες όσο και για τους άντρες. Τα στοιχεία διαφόρων ερευνών δείχνουν επίσης ότι σε γενικό βαθμό οι γυναίκες τείνουν να ενθαρρύνουν τα άτομα και τις ομάδες να εντοπίζουν ευκαιρίες για αλλαγή, να κυνηγούν νέες επιχειρηματικές ευκαιρίες, να τους ενδυναμώνουν, να λαμβάνουν πρωτοβουλίες και αποφάσεις. Η χαμηλή συμμετοχή στο εργατικό δυναμικό και η κατώτερη πορεία σταδιοδρομίας των γυναικών οφείλεται εν μέρη στα εμπόδια που προκύπτουν λόγω της τεκνοποίησης και της φροντίδας των παιδιών. Είναι σημαντικό οι ίδιες οι εταιρείες να γίνουν πιο ευαίσθητες στις ανάγκες των μητέρων και να δεχτούν την τεκνοποίηση ως μέρος μιας παραγωγικής ζωής μιας γυναίκας και όχι ως εμπόδιο στην εργασία. Πέρα από αυτό, χρειαζόμαστε ρητές αλλαγές στην πολιτική που θα εξισορροπήσουν τη θέση ανδρών και γυναικών στην αγορά εργασίας. Πρώτον, οι νόμοι κατά όλων των μορφών διακρίσεων, αναφύλου, σεξουαλικό προσανατολισμό και φυλή, πρέπει να εφαρμοστούν πολύ αυστηρά. Δεύτερον, το κύριο κόστος της άδειας μητρότητας πρέπει να προέρχεται από τη γενική φορολογία και όχι να επιβαρύνει τις επιχειρήσεις που τις αποθαρρύνει να απασχολούν γυναίκες. Τρίτον, στους άντρες θα πρέπει επίσης να προσφέρεται άδεια πατρότητας υπό τις ίδιες συνθήκες με τις γυναίκες. Συνεπώς έτσι θα τους εμπλέκει περισσότερο στη φροντίδα των παιδιών και θα τους καθιστά παρόμοιους με τις γυναίκες στα μάτια των εργοδοτών. Και στο τέλος πρέπει να καθιερώσουμε την πρόσβαση σε παιδική φροντίδα υψηλής ποιότητας για όλους, καθιστώντας ευκολότερη τη δουλειά των φροντιστών και ταυτόχρονα προσφέροντας ένα δυνατό ξεκίνημα στη ζωή με εξαιρετική πρώιμη εκπαίδευση. Στην ερώτηση «Ποιος πλένει τα πιάτα στο σπίτι σας» από πάρα πολλούς ερωτητέντες, το 93% απάντησε η σύζυγος, το 6% άλλα πρόσωπα και μόνο το 1% απάντησε ο σύζυγος. Γι' αυτό κοιτάμε όλους τους ανθρώπους ανάλογα με τις δεξιότητές τους, με τον τρόπο που έχουν μεγαλώσει επαγγελματικά και προσφέρουμε ίσες ευκαιρίες σε όλους, ανεξάρτητα φύλου ανεξάρτητα ηλικίας, εθνικότητας ή άλλων διακρίσεων. Μία κοινωνία δεν είναι δυνατόν να προοδεύσει αν οι γυναίκες μένουν αμόρφωτες. Ευχαριστώ πολύ.
Εμείς ευχαριστούμε πολύ, κυρία Κοτανίδο, και πραγματικά είναι και λίγο σοκαριστικό αν αναλογιστεί κανείς ότι όλα αυτά τα στοιχεία για την εκπαίδευση δεν είναι και τόσο μακριά, δεν ανήκουν τόσο πίσω στο παρελθόν, όπως επίσης τα στοιχεία για τις σεξουαλικές παρενοχλήσεις που αφορούν σε ένα συντριπτικό ποσοστό γυναίκες πανεπιστημιακής μόρφωσης. Αυτά δείχνουν και πολλά για τους ανταγωνιστικούς χώρους εργασίας, όπου καλούμαστε κάθε μέρα να δίνουμε τον καλύτερό μας σε αυτό. Το 1% των ανδρών που πλένει τα πιάτα θα το αφήσω ασχολίαστο λόγω της ημέρας. Σας ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ. Σε αυτό το σημείο θα ήθελα να καλέσω την κυρία Μαριάννα Λεμός, Vice President of Elpida Association of Friends of Children with Cancer. Σας ευχαριστούμε πολύ που είστε μαζί μας σε αυτή τη συνάντηση και περιμένουμε με ανυπομονησία να σας ακούσουμε.
Thank you so much. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is such a great honor for me to be among all of you today on the occasion of Women's Day. All the great women participating in today's events are a true inspiration for the world and for their country. I would like to thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak on women on the era of the pandemic. I will try to do so respectfully because we should keep in mind all the women in the world that do not have the privilege to have their voices heard. Our world has been facing a major challenge for almost a year now. The pandemic has changed our societies, our lives, our thoughts, our feelings, the way we see the world. Thousands of lives have been lost, lives that have become numbers. But these are not just numbers. These are in fact parents, loved ones, relatives, friends. Then the more people we lose, more pain spreads in our hearts and in our societies. Which leads, this is not only a major health crisis, but above all, a social one that has left open wounds to each and every one of us. Lives of women all around the world have been severely affected by the pandemic in general. Whether we are thinking of a doctor or a nurse serving in the front line, a stay-at-home mother, a mother who now works from home, a woman trying to make ends meet in the developing world. There is no place in the world where a woman has stayed unaffected by the pandemic. The lockdown and the social distancing orders have indisputably a devastating impact on women and girls' lives. Women who have lost their jobs or have their salaries reduced because of the economic crisis created by the pandemic. Millions of women that are becoming victims of domestic violence, which is surging around the world and are unable to seek for proper counseling or legal advice. Women who are in the front line of the fight against COVID-19, who are also mothers, daughters, or caregivers, and cannot even hug their loved ones returning home from work. Women facing mental health issues because of the immense amount of pressure they are dealing with. The coronavirus crisis, which is global and a long-lasting one, has highlighted, according to the United Nations, both the centrality of their contributions and the disproportionate burdens that women carry. However, it also offers an opportunity. It is the opportunity for our societies to act with solidarity and compassion. It is the opportunity to rise above oneself and act with a vision of a better and fairer world. My grandmother, Mariana Vardinoianni, who is the soul and the inspiration behind today's events, has always been a great role model, not only for myself, but for women of all ages and backgrounds. By being such a strong woman, She has taught me from a very young age that we must use our voices in order to bring change. That is our ultimate power. Her actions have always been a guiding light in our family. With her own constant focus on family values, she was an example to her children on what it is to be a great mother. In turn, this meant I was privileged enough to have my mother teach me the challenges and importance of motherhood in an exemplary fashion. Because of such strong tools, I have been provided to raise my two daughters. They say that when a child is born, a mother is born as well. You are never the same person as you used to be, and everyone that has become a mother knows that. The hug which a woman embraces her child becomes a hug for every child in the world, for everyone in need. As a mother myself, but also as a daughter, a woman trying to balance between her personal goals and visions and her family, one thing is clear: it is not easy. And in times of crisis, like the one we are dealing with now, things are becoming even more challenging. This is why we need to stand by each other and support one another. Policymakers, international organizations, and governments to develop and formulate answers for this major crisis and its devastating consequences on women's lives. Because when we fail to support women, we all lose. When a woman thrives, then her family is thriving. And when a family, society thrives. Policy making is, of course, crucial to this direction. It is not, however, enough. The history of Elpida Association of Friends of Children with Cancer, which was founded by my grandmother 30 years ago, and where I have the immense honor as president, is a living proof that we can become the change that we want to see in the world. As Mahatma Gandhi said about women, they are a bright example of social solidarity in my country. Elpida was started by a group of women in Greece in order to support children with cancer. Back then, there was absolutely no infrastructure for children with cancer in Greece. This group of women made it and changed the meaning of social solidarity for a whole country. The history of Elpida's Association is a lesson for me in every step I take in my life. With true love for our co-humans, devotion to the greater good, and sharing and giving, we can all make miracles happen. So, if there is one thing that all of us can do, it's to stand by the woman next to us. Even if we cannot literally lend a hand, we can open our hearts and souls and support women struggling under the new conditions imposed by the pandemic. Stand not only by your own mother or daughters or own friends or our own neighbors, but stand by every woman on earth who is in need. Let this major crisis become an opportunity for the building for a better world, a more compassionate society. Let's open our minds, our hearts, and thoughts, and understand that we can only face this together, even from a distance. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And yes, women can do miracles. Thank you so much. I would like to call upon now Professor Fotini Tsarikoglou, Emeritus Professor of Psychology at the Pantheon University here in Athens and also writer.
Νομίζω θα κάνω κι εγώ, I will make use of the privilege of the last speaker and θα ακολουθώ το παράδειγμα της κυρίας Κοτανίδου και πραγματικά προτιμώ να μιλήσω στα ελληνικά. Φτάνουμε στο τέλος αυτής της εκδήλωσης. Ακούστηκαν πολύ ενδιαφέροντα πράγματα. Η τελευταία ιδίως τοποθέτηση της Μαριάννας Λεμού, να πω ότι με συγκίνησε προσωπικά αυτά που είπε, όπως τα είπε. Η εκδήλωση αυτή μας βρίσκει σε μια ακραία παράδοξη εποχή. Μέσα στην πανδημία, το ακούσαμε πολλές φορές, ο κόσμος μας έχει μεταμορφωθεί. Ο κόσμος που γνώριζε ο καθένας μας, έτσι όπως τον γνώριζε, έχει γίνει άλλο. Πώς και με τι κόστος επιλύονται τα τραύματα της ψυχής, αλλά και του πολιτισμού. Μπορούμε να αισιοδοξούμε? Μπορούμε? Θα αναφερθώ κι εγώ σε κάποια ερευνητικά δεδομένα για τις επιπτώσεις της πανδημίας στην ψυχική μας υγεία. Αφορούν στην Ελλάδα, συγκλίνουν όμως λίγο πολύ με εκείνα όλων των χωρών στην Ευρώπη και την Αμερική. Τι βλέπουμε λοιπόν? Πολλά από αυτά είναι αναμενόμενα και χωρίς να είμαστε ειδικοί τα αναμένουμε. Βλέπουμε λοιπόν, παρατηρούμε, εκτός από την ολοφάνερη αύξηση καταθλίψεων, εξαρτήσεων, αγχωδών διαταραχών, εκτός από την αναμενόμενη αύξηση της βίας, του θυμού, της οργής, έχουμε μια σημαντική αύξηση της ενδοοικογενειακής βίας, πολύ σημαντική. Εκτός από όλο αυτό το σκοτεινό λοιπόν κομμάτι της πανδημίας, υπάρχει και κάτι στο οποίο μπορούμε να στηριχτούμε, υπάρχει ένα έβριμα που πραγματικά μας επιτρέπει να είμαστε αισιόδοξοι. Υπάρχει μια αύξηση συμπεριφορών αλληλεγγύης, έγνοιας δηλαδή και φροντίδας για τον άλλον, μια αύξηση που αγγίζει πραγματικά το 30% σε σχέση με την προ-πανδημίας εποχή. Θα πω ότι η γυναίκα πρωτοστατεί εδώ. Σε μια γυναίκα άλλωστε οφείλουμε την ζωντάνια που μέσα στην πανδημία το κίνημα ζωής, όπως θεωρώ ότι είναι το Me Too, το κίνημα ζωής απόκτησε στη χώρα μας. Πραγματικά απόκτησε μια τρομακτική ορμή, μια δύναμη, αγκαλιάστηκε από πάρα πολύ κόσμο. Αναφέρομαι βέβαια στη χρυσή Ολυμπιονίκη μας, τη Σοφία Μπεκατόρου, που είχε τη γενναιότητα να σπάσει το φράγμα της σιωπής, έκανε την αρχή. Θύματα βίας ακολούθησαν, διεκδίκησαν τη χαμένη φωνή τους. Άρχισε να γίνεται κατανοητό ότι το αμίλητο αρρωσταίνει. Έχω την αίσθηση ότι αυτή η ένταση, η ορμή με την οποία το κίνημα στη χώρα μας άνθησε, τροφοδοτήθηκε κατά κάποιο τρόπο, για να μην πω πολύ, και από όλο αυτό το ψυχοπιεστικό κλίμα της πανδημίας. Σαν μια κραυγή αγωνίας δηλαδή. Δεν ενδίδω στο θάνατο. Υπάρχει μέσα μου, αντιστέκομαι. Η δυσκολία αντί να με διαλύσει, με δυναμώνει. Άλλωστε γνωρίζουμε, όχι μόνο από την ψυχολογία, αλλά και από την πολύπαθη ιστορία του τόπου μας, ότι δύσκολες καταστάσεις, πόλεμοι, κακουχίες, ενεργοποιούν μέσα μας δυνάμεις που ούτε καν μπορεί να φανταζόμασταν ότι είχαμε. Δυνάμεις δηλαδή υπέρβασης και από τη μεριά της ζωής. Η δύναμη του Me Too συνδέεται με την αλλαγή βαθιά ριζωμένων νοοτροπιών. Και εδώ βέβαια αρχίζουν τα δύσκολα, γιατί αυτή η αλλαγή νοοτροπιών είναι μια αφάνταστα δύσκολη διαδικασία. Τα στερεότυπα είναι δεκανίκια μας. Είναι αυτά που συντηρούν ένα ψεύτικα τακτοποιημένο κόσμο, ένα κόσμο που οφείλει να μένει αδιατάρακτα ίδιος και αυτό το ίδιο, το αδιατάρακτο ίδιο, να αποτελεί για μας μια ψεύτικη πλασματική ασφάλεια. Πίσω όμως από την αναγνωρίσιμη Σοφία Μπεκατόρου που έκανε την αρχή, υπάρχουν χιλιάδες ανώνυμες Σοφίες. Ας πάει το μυαλό μας σήμερα σε αυτές. Τα μέλη έγιναν αναφορές και είναι πολύ σημαντικό που ακούστηκαν. Θα το επαναλάβω κι εγώ ότι το μυαλό μας, ειδικά σήμερα, σε αυτή τη μέρα, συμβολικά, πρέπει να πάει στα μέλη μειονοτικών ομάδων, στις μετανάστριες, γυναίκες ευπαθών και ευάλωτων πληθυσμών, στις δίχως ιδιότητες γυναίκες. Είναι η στιγμή να στραφεί η προσοχή μας σε αυτή, ξέρετε, την άλλη όχθη. Αυτή η άλλη όχθη είναι εκείνη που σαν σκιά απλώνεται κάθε φορά που πάμε να γιορτάσουμε. Είναι η σκιά που λίγο, ξέρετε, αυτή τη γιορτή τη σκοτεινιάζει λίγο, τη σκεπάζει. Άλλωστε, η πανδημία βάθινε τις ανισότητες, αύξησε την επισφάλεια, την ανεργία. 1 στις 3 γυναίκες υποχρεώθηκαν να χάσουν τη δουλειά τους και θα συμφωνήσετε ότι μορφή βίας είναι η απώλεια της εργασίας, η ανεργία, η φτώχεια. Είναι μια βία σιωπηλή όμως αυτή που δεν επισύρει καθόλου πάνω της τα φώτα της δημοσιότητας. Σε κάθε όμως περίπτωση η έγνοια μας για τον άλλον είναι μια κινητήρια δύναμη αλλαγής. Σε αυτήν οφείλουμε την ανθρώπινη μας ιδιότητα, θα πω, ίσως και τον ίδιο μας τον πολιτισμό. Όταν ρωτήσανε την σπουδαία Αμερικανίδα ανθρωπολόγο Μάργαρετ Μίντ ποιο είναι το πρώτο σημάδι πολιτισμού σε μια κουλτούρα, ξέρετε, δεν αναφέρθηκε σε κάποιο θρησκευτικό αντικείμενο, σε κάποιο εργαλείο κυνηγιού. Μίλησε για ένα μυριαίο οστό 15.000 ετών, ένα οστό το οποίο όμως είχε σπάσει και έπειτα είχε θεραπευθεί. Στο ζωικό βασίλειο, όταν σπάσει το πόδι σου, πεθαίνεις. Παραμονεύουν τα άγρια ζώα, δεν υπάρχει περίπτωση να σωθείς. Κανένα ζώο δεν επιβιώνει με σπασμένο πόδι. Ένα μυριαίο οστό που έχει θεραπευτεί είναι απόδειξη ότι κάποιος αφιέρωσε χρόνο, έδεσε την πληγή, φρόντισε τον τραυματία. Το σημείο στο οποίο αρχίζει ο πολιτισμός μας είναι όταν δόθηκε βοήθεια σε κάποιον που έχει ανάγκη. Πραγματικά η έγνοια μας για τον άλλον μας ανθρωποποιεί. Είμαι άνθρωπος από τη στιγμή που παραστέκομαι στον άλλον που πάσχει. Κάποιος λοιπόν δεν έμεινε όρθιος, ατάραχος, στην πληγή του άλλου αναγνώρισε τη δική του μοίρα, έσκυψε και το φρόντισε. Μπήκε στην ίδια θέση με τον πάσχοντα. Ιδού λοιπόν η γέννηση της ενσυναίσθησης. Επιτρέψτε μου εδώ να θεωρήσω ότι ο άνθρωπος αυτός ήταν γυναίκα. 15.000 χρόνια πριν. Ήταν γυναίκα. Μπορούμε να ορίσουμε τη φροντίδα σαν μια πρώτη τέχνη ζωής. Όταν γίνεται δέσμευση και πράξη αυτή η ανησυχία για τον άλλον, συνδέεται με το ερώτημα τι θα γίνει αυτός αν εγώ δεν τον φροντίσω και ακόμα τι θα γίνω εγώ αν δεν τον φροντίσω τον άλλον. Κάτι τέτοιο θα σκέφτηκε μια παλιά νοσηλεύτρια, ηλικιωμένη τώρα και με αρχή άνοιας. Κυρία Κοτανίδου, ίσως σας φέρνει στο νου κάτι από αυτό που θα πω. Είναι μια πραγματική ιστορία. Θα την ονομάσω Μέλπο. Η Μέλπο λοιπόν που έχει περάσει όλη της τη ζωή σαν νοσηλεύτρια. Δεν πολύ καταλαβαίνει πλέον τι γίνεται γύρω της, ακούει ειδήσεις. Έχει αρχίσει το μυαλό της και χάνεται μέσα στα σκοτάδια της άνοιας. Κάποια στιγμή όμως κατάλαβε βλέποντας τις ειδήσεις ότι οι άνθρωποι εκεί που εργάζονταν, εκεί που είχε περάσει όλο το μεγαλύτερο μέρος της ζωής της, χρειάζονται τη βοήθειά της. Τι έκανε λοιπόν? Έψαξε, βρήκε την παλιά της στολή, τη φόρεσε και βρήκε κουτσά στραβά το δρόμο, κατάφερε να φτάσει στο γνώριμο νοσοκομείο της. Θέλω να βοηθήσω, είπε. Ήλθα να βοηθήσω. Αληθινή ιστορία. Σαν αυτές που μας κάνουν να αγαπάμε τον τόπο μας και τους ανθρώπους του. Η άνοια δεν μπόρεσε να καλύψει το ριζωμένο μέσα της αντανακλαστικό της φροντίδας για τον άλλον. Η γένους θηλυκού φροντίδα είναι ένα πάρχιο μητρικό γυναικείο χαρακτηριστικό. Μήπως από και αυτό το μήπως είναι μια πολύ αματική μικρή λεξούλα. Μήπως λοιπόν από τα συντρίμμια ενός καταπονημένου συστήματος γεννιέται ξανά ένας νέος πολιτισμός. αξίζει, πραγματικά αξίζει να στοιχηματίσουμε στην αισιοδοξία της βούλησης και στο ρόλο της γυναίκας σε αυτό το νέο πολιτισμό. Σας ευχαριστώ πολύ.
Εμείς ευχαριστούμε πολύ, μας συγκινήσατε και μακάρι το ναι να είναι η απάντηση σε αυτό το μήπως και μακάρι όλοι να βλέπουμε στις πληγές των άλλων τις δικές μας πληγές και να βρίσκουμε δύναμη να τις επουλώνουμε για να εξελισσόμαστε και για να προχωράμε μπροστά. Θέλω πολύ να σας ευχαριστήσω. Θέλω να ευχαριστήσω πολύ το Ίδρυμα Μαριάννα Βαρδινογιάννη που μου έκανε αυτή τη τιμή να συντονίσω αυτή τη συζήτηση. Είστε όλες υπέροχες, όλες μας δώσατε από ένα μάθημα και όλες μας εμπνεύσατε. Σας ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ.
Ευχαριστούμε.
Excellencies, distinguished speakers, allow me first to thank the Mariana Vardinogiannis Foundation and its president, Ms. Mariana Vardinogiannis, for this very honoring invitation to speak in this afternoon session on women in the pandemic on today's celebratory International Women's Rights Day. I feel very honored to be with you, and I apologize for the slight delay, but I have been working in the United Nations this afternoon. I have been asked in a brief intervention this evening to focus on the work of the United Nations human rights bodies in protecting human rights and women's rights in particular, and the impact of the current pandemic on the protection of these rights. Indeed, in 1948, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights adopted by the UN listed equality and non-discrimination as two of its fundamental principles. This brief but very important text, which laid the foundation of the universal protection of human rights, has expanded human rights guarantees not only within the UN system, but also on a regional level. 2020 marked the anniversary of the Beijing Declaration and Platform of Action, the most comprehensive roadmap for women's and girls' rights. This platform has led to a significant mobilization of women's movements around the world to implement human rights, but also to advocate for Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, in particular the fifth goal, which is to promote gender equality. In this context, this year's overall theme for International Women's Day is Women in Leadership, Achieving an Equal Future in a COVID-19 World. And under this theme, the UN wants to celebrate the efforts by women and girls around the world in shaping a more equal future and recovery in the post-pandemic phase, but also to serve as an occasion to highlight the gaps that remain in human rights protection. Today, the international law of human rights offers considerable guarantees through binding treaties supplemented by international standards and supported by specialist institutions within the United Nations. On a universal level, the United Nations Twin Covenants of 1966, namely the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, which transformed the Universal Declaration into hard treaty law, have since been supplemented by a number of specialized international human rights instruments. Through the supervisory mechanisms put in place within the United Nations system, the situation of human rights in states across the world is monitored, but also, something which might be less known to the general public, individuals have the possibility to submit their complaints of violations of human rights to treaty body mechanisms. So there is an institutional framework in place. Whether it is robust enough remains to be seen. But in particular, for today, the United Nations Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, which marked its 40th anniversary just last year, is the UN's basic achievement for the advancement of women's human rights. So there has been progress over the last decades. More girls are going to school. Fewer girls are forced into early marriages, and laws are being reformed to advance gender equality. Despite these gains, many challenges remain. Discriminatory laws and social norms remain pervasive, exacerbating gender equality in many spheres of life. Other practices, such as trafficking of women, slavery, femicides, unfortunately, continue to exist around the world. At the same time, we need to keep in mind the importance of the existence of international and regional mechanisms for promoting, monitoring, and guaranteeing human rights protections. I want to come now to address the challenges in this era of the pandemic. Despite these challenges, I have to say that the work within the United Nations system continues. It's been continuing online, virtually, with some side effects, which are not always beneficial to the effective promotion of human rights, but at least there is an assurance that there is no protection gap despite the pandemic. But I think the most important lesson that we can take from what I've heard from those who have spoken before me this afternoon is that what appear to be gains and successes are tenuous and can be lost. According to figures released yesterday by UN Women, women remain underrepresented in public life and decision-making, as revealed in a recent report by the United Nations Secretary General. Women are heads of state or government in 22 countries, and only 24.9% of national parliamentarians are women. And I do want to indeed say in this respect that Greece is in the better of the positions in these percentages, as we have both a female, the first female president of the Republic, and a number of parliamentarians, many of whom spoke this afternoon. But ladies and gentlemen, challenges have been exacerbated as a result of the unprecedented sanitary crisis. The COVID-19 pandemic is having a devastating impact throughout the world in all spheres of life and engages the full spectrum of human rights. As we are seeing, the responses of many states in addressing the pandemic have a common denominator, which is of restricting human rights and freedoms, civil and political, through lockdowns, curfews, prohibitions of gatherings, closures of businesses and public places, and closures of schools. The same could be said of social, economic, and cultural rights, where the impact of COVID-19 are apparent. In the area of human rights, as many speakers before me, I will give the examples that the UN is also facing. High rates of domestic violence, including sexual violence, have been one of the most tragic consequences of the effects of long-term lockdowns and ensuing economic and family stress. The pandemic has caused a string of negative effects for women, especially those who belong to marginalized or discriminated groups, who have been among those who have been the hardest hit. Women have taken on extra domestic and care work responsibilities. Their economic livelihood has faced enormous risk, and they often encounter more difficulty, not only in keeping their jobs, but also are encountering difficulties and obstacles in access to health care. These are just a few of the consequences of the COVID-19 sanitary crisis that we are witnessing across the world. At the same time, women and girls also continue to be largely excluded in many parts of the world from COVID-19 recovery efforts and decision making. For example, a recent survey of 30 countries with COVID-19 task forces and committees showed that, on average, only a quarter of the members were women. Yet the voices of women to respond to human rights issues that the pandemic is enhancing is critical. And leadership, women's leadership included, is essential to help us reach a post-COVID world which will be more equitable, more just, and more inclusive. Let me close with a few remarks on the way ahead. This year's Women Day also marks the launching of the Generation Equality Forum, which will begin in Mexico City from 29th March of this year, and which will culminate in June 2021 in Paris, all to be conducted, of course, virtually. Through all these continuing efforts, hopefully, the voice of women will continue to be heard across the world. The solidarity and collective strength of women to address the multiple human rights struggles arising from the pandemic has already delivered and sustained real and positive change, and I take this from the message issued today by the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Mrs. Bachelet. Several women's heads of states have been commended for their efforts in combating the virus and its effect on their countries. Closer to the front line, and this is very important for us, all of us, women in social justice movements and civil society organizations, such as the foundation that is hosting us this afternoon, are reaching vulnerable communities, including victims of domestic and sexual violence, and are joining their efforts to ensure access to health care for all those in need without distinction, to ensure continuity of those essential services, especially those which women in particular require. Ladies and gentlemen, there is always room for improvement and change. For me, women's rights can the best be defended if we keep in mind two fundamental principles. First, that human rights are universal. They spread across the globe, or should spread across the globe, on a universal level and on equal footing for all. And second, human rights are indivisible. They break barriers, be they barriers social, of gender or other, across any distinction, with the realization that all rights, be they civil, political, or social, or economic, or cultural, are indeed and should be interrelated in the fight for guaranteeing the promotion of all human rights. I thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.